everyone, and welcome to Can I Just Say, a Common Room Radio podcast. I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive. And we are discussing possibly my favorite book.
Of all time?
I have two favorite books. I have this and I have The Blind Assassin, and those are my two favorite books. And yup. And now
you
we're
don't mess
discussing
around.
I do not. And I didn't say the name of this one. We are talking about Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which is a big deal.
It's a very big deal. Yes, absolutely. Miss Lifetime member of the Jane Austen Society.
I am a lifetime member of the Jane Austen Society. Also, we met actually in a book group.
That's right. I always forget that.
That's how we met.
That is how we started talking.
So
God,
this is,
yes.
I know. So this is just kind of lovely little full circle moment.
That's right. Wow. Luckily, I remember almost nothing about that in those days. So
I don't remember that much about that discussion, which is also probably good. I'm sure I had very strong opinions because I generally do about this book.
Then it was the first time that I had ever read the book.
Yeah.
But because of the nature of the thing, it was like a couple of chapters a week, which is not how I read. I like to really absorb the whole book all at once. So that made it quite difficult for me. So this was a lovely experience to be able to really dive in.
Just read the book. Yeah. It's such a great book.
It is lovely. It's paced beautifully.
Yes, it is. It really, really is. She's a good writer, that Jane Austen.
She's not bad.
Right? She's got some talent. So the funniest thing happened is that I opened my podcast app today and I saw one of my favorite podcasts who we've actually recorded in our Black Sails podcast, Fathoms Deep, with one of the co-hosts of that, Elizabeth Menkel. The podcast is called Fansplaining, which is a podcast about fan culture. And today's was about Jane Austen.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. They had a guest named Ted Scheinman, who wrote a book called Camp Austen. And he works at a camp that I didn't know about. That is a Jane Austen camp that's like the kind of somewhere
Jane
between
Austen camp?
Yep, that it sounds like it's somewhere between kind of a academic conference and a con, like a fan con.
Oh my God, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he talked about that. He talked about Jane Austen Society. He talked about a lot about Pride and Prejudice, and Jane Austen generally. And it's a lovely, lovely podcast. So y'all should go find that. It's called Fansplaining, episode 76. All right. Did you want to read some reviews? Because we have some.
Yes, we do have some new reviews. So thank you very much, everyone who took the time. So we have from Lolo, 19W. Enriching and entertaining. Why, thank you, Lolo. Daphne and Elizabeth always bring fresh insights to their analyses of stories and enrich my enjoyment of the material. I began following them during Black Sails and am so pleased to join in the new conversations. Loving the discussions of Howard's End. That's lovely.
Thank you.
Then we have from cousin Liz, a pleasure. I found this podcast while looking for Howard's End discussion. I really enjoy your approach and look forward to Sense and Sensibility. Well, I hope you liked it, cousin Liz. Boy, we had fun with Sense and Sensibility.
We did. We had so much fun. Thank you, both of you. And yes, everyone, please do leave us reviews if you have time, because it helps other people find us.
It sure does. Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes. All right. I guess we get on to the discussion now, huh?
Yeah, let's just get rolling. I think there is so much to discuss, and of course we can't get it all. So we'll just do our best to be delighted analytical fans. How about that?
Sounds great to me. I wanted to bring up something that was not in our notes to each other.
Oh, okay. Right off the get-go.
Interesting. Yeah, right off. Sorry. Surprise.
Okay. That's fine. I didn't prep or anything. Go ahead.
So I was looking up. I just wanted to make sure, because I was all prepared to say that Jane Austen wrote this after Sense and Sensibility, and I just wanted to make sure, because the order that the books were published is not the same that they were written.
Right.
So this Pride and Prejudice was written after Sense and Sensibility, so that was true. I find it really interesting. Its original name was First Impressions.
Right. Which I quite like, actually.
I like that very much, too. And the thing I just wanted to, when I was thinking about that, the thing I just wanted to bring up that I think is kind of interesting, and that we don't need to, discuss in depth, but I think it is interesting, and maybe we'll get to that discussion, is I really liked that Sense and Sensibility was a story about sisters, and that the romantic people, like the romantic interest, that's what I'm trying to say, the romantic interest, that the men that were the romantic interests were not flat characters, but much flatter than our two main characters.
Yes.
Right?
Certainly. Uh-huh.
And now she did a book where the two main characters, the most fleshed out characters, are the two halves of the romantic pairing, and that the sisters have become now the ones that are not flat, but flatter, kind of more representative of types than they are like full-fledged people. And I think that's really interesting. And it almost feels to me like we now have two books where she was investigating the relationships of kind of people that are two halves of a whole, but in totally different people. In totally different way. That two halves of a whole in totally different ways. That the sisters are kind of two halves of a whole from origin, and that looking at a romantic pairing is like going towards two halves of a whole.
Sure. That makes sense. That's lovely. Yeah.
I just found that really, I don't know, it's like that just occurred to me. I thought that was kind of lovely, and it's neat when you get to look at an author and their writings in order. Not that we want to say too much about the author, but you can talk about the process. And that's kind of an interesting thing that she's like, you can almost feel like that she was investigating different aspects of life and relationships for female protagonists.
Yeah. No, that's gorgeous.
I don't know. There was just something lovely in that for me. But where we were supposed to start is with the second title, just like the last book, where we had two words that represented our two main characters in different ways. We now have two words that I feel represent our two characters. We have pride and we have prejudice. We don't have to define our terms like we did with sensibility, but I wanted to start off our discussion by talking about, why these two words? How does this frame the story?
Yeah. Now, you think that they're specifically attached to each character?
I do. Yes.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Right. I know. First impressions actually would argue towards prejudice on both sides. I do think that Darcy more represents pride. Again, they both have pride, but
they both have both. There's no argument there.
Right. But I think that the thing that maybe not the thing that defines them, but the thing that limits them in ways, the thing that they had to overcome and learn about to become the people that could be together was that he had to overcome pride and she had to overcome prejudice.
That makes a lot of sense. I like that.
Like he was willing to flip his idea about her quite quickly, and she held on to hers with a death grip.
I mean, yes, that is true. I feel like even in his proposal, he was still pretty prejudiced.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, maybe we should talk about that real quickly. Should we jump ahead to the proposal?
Oh, no. We can't jump to the proposal already.
Okay.
I just. Yeah. Okay.
We'll have to discuss that. We'll have to discuss whether we're going to call that prejudice or we're going to call that judging reality. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, he was an ass. I mean, we can all agree on that. He was an ass. He did it.
Sure.
But I don't think he was misunderstanding who Elizabeth was.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. So it was a judgment call on her station and not on her person.
I don't think he had that wrong either. I mean,
No.
He was seeing the situation quite clearly. His pride was not was getting in his way. But I don't think he was misjudging anyone, really. We'll get there.
Okay.
I mean, and she concedes that in the end. And I think the one thing, I have many criticisms of Elizabeth Bennet. I mean, I guess I should just upfront say this. Like, she is a beloved character.
Of course.
Who I love. And I'm also super critical of.
Yeah, I think we're supposed to be. I hope we're supposed to be, because it's hard not to be, at least in the beginning. She gets that lovely... the fact that she recognizes her flaws and grows from them so early in the book, it's like halfway through, is huge. But we needed that from her, I think, to really attach to her well. Because
I feel like a lot of people don't recognize that. A lot of people, I think, hold... I mean, maybe this has just been my experience. I feel like a lot of people hold Elizabeth Bennet up and just don't, and see all the movement on Darcy's side and not on her side. And
yeah, which is really unfair, because we're presented with two very flawed characters in the beginning.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And who both learn and grow. And,
yes.
And that's why this book is so beautiful.
Yeah. I would agree.
Okay, so should we go through? I did actually list their like major moments together. Should we do that, or do you want to go somewhere else with it first? I would love to do that.
Sure, let's start there then.
Okay. All right. So the first ball, like we had already met Bingley at this point, but the first ball. Yeah, this is a hard book because it's like I want to talk about everyone suddenly, but let's like focus on them first.
Okay, sure.
I'm also trying really hard to like not just do my agenda. I have such an agenda talking about Darcy. I guess I should be upfront about that too. Maybe, yeah. Should I quickly like place myself in the Darcy fandom?
Go right ahead.
Do you think that's appropriate?
That's probably appropriate. Yes.
Yeah, I think I should, be full disclosure when I come to this book because I've read it so many times. Which isn't to say I don't learn from it every time, including this time. I learn a lot from it every time. A lot of people see Darcy as just an ass. And I am a person who sees Darcy as kind of an ass, but mostly an awkward dude. Like that's my take on Darcy, is that he's just really bad at peopling.
He is bad at peopling, but I would argue that it goes beyond awkwardness. I think he willfully decides that he doesn't have to try, which you could argue is within his rights. The book argues several times from several different perspectives that he's within his rights because he is actually of a higher station than everyone. And why shouldn't he be proud? He is entitled to be proud. But he could stand to be less flat. He is flat out, to me, he is flat out rude at that first party. And I don't think he's rude to cause harm. He intends no harm. He just
can't be bothered.
He just can't be bothered.
I think I think it's a mixture at that first thing. I mean, I think there is definitely the element. I mean, certainly what he said about Elizabeth, I don't think he meant for her to hear that. I mean, this is our moment.
He couldn't have been trying that hard if she did hear.
Right.
That's what I'm saying, is like he just wasn't trying very hard to be decently polite to people for like 2 hours.
Right. I think he definitely wasn't trying too hard. The question of whether his pride is justified, I think you can't have that conversation until we get to Pemberley and we hear about all of his good works and stuff like that.
Oh, no, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because again, you're right. We get so many people like having opinions about why he's proud.
Right.
But ultimately, when we start learning about what he does, like he's not just some random rich dude. Like Bingley is some random rich dude, right? And Bingley feels, wow, we're already going to get into the responsibility discussion. I put that way down on the list.
I know, but there's no way to do it. I feel like you can't talk about the characters without talking
about kind of everything at one time,
and certainly about society.
Okay, so let's take the essential difference between someone like Darcy and someone like Bingley, right? Darcy is from the aristocracy. He is from a long history that was a feudal history of being wealthy and having responsibility to the people around you, to everyone around you. And this is, again, the housekeeper, I'm forgetting her name right now, but she brings this up.
Sure.
He's a good
Reynolds,
landlord.
I think maybe, but maybe not.
Yes. He's a good landlord. Like this idea that he actually had responsibility towards the people of a lower station that were within his reach.
So many people's pleasure and pain depended on him, I think she said, or something like that.
Exactly. So that is something that we don't learn about him until much later. Again, someone reading the book at the time probably would have been much more aware of that. So if you take that versus Bingley, I mean, I love Bingley, don't get me wrong, but Bingley's just like random rich dude who clearly feels not really any responsibility to anyone. Like, remember when he left Netherfield and they were like, well, he really should, like, if he's not coming back, he should let it to someone else. Like,
right. Sure.
There is a sense that wealthy people are supposed to have responsibility to the people around them. And so Bingley, I mean, again, I'm not going to group him with other people who are very talkative and, and seem polite and seem nice, but don't have this weight on them.
Right. Well, and then we have the lovely contrast of Catherine de Bourgh, who is up in everybody's business. I mean, she considers that not only is she the patroness of Collins, but also tells them precisely how to run their household and how many chickens to keep and where to put them. And just, I mean, she's got her nose in everything. So I think she contrasts beautifully. We have Bingley on the far side, who just is lovely and delightful to everybody, but can't think of...
Well, he exists for his own pleasure.
Yeah.
He's a rich person who exists for his own pleasure. And he doesn't do bad things to other people because of it, but he also doesn't really do any good.
Sure. That makes, I mean, other than hosting parties. Yeah. Which
but like ultimately,
he's not doing for them. Yeah.
Right.
That's a good
And now
point.
Darcy is much richer than Bingley. That is made clear. But again, right. So Catherine de Bourgh is like almost like, she's almost like a caricature of how that goes wrong, which also shows us how much Darcy does this with
Gets
grace.
it right. Sure.
So that's the thing. So this is, we have this whole thing. What's the quote? I have the quote.
I think it's also important to note that they're at the first party at Netherfield, that those were not people to whom anything from Darcy was due.
Exactly.
Had it been a party at Pemberley, I'm sure he would have behaved differently to his own neighbors.
Exactly. Right. So we have that too. Like we have the fact, this I felt like is a very important moment, because every once in a while, I mean, we haven't talked about like the whole thing with the gossip and Lizzie at the first party, but let's like jump again. We're just
so
jumping
much
all over the
gossip
place.
in this book.
Right.
Oh,
but
it's painful.
But Lizzie does recognize when Collins goes to talk to Darcy,
She knows that he's out of line. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is what I'm trying to say. It's like she's very selective about when she chooses to recognize Darcy's station and when she doesn't. So let's go back now to the first ball. So again, there are rules about, and we're introduced to that in the very beginning. There are rules about when people should like up and talk to each other and when they shouldn't. Now, it is Darcy's job, I believe, as the person of a higher station to actually initiate most conversations. So that's where he was faulty.
Darcy cannot, in the kingly sense, condescend.
Right.
He does not do that well at this first party. We see that he does do that at Pemberley in, what's his shirt? Derbyshire, maybe?
Yeah, Derbyshire.
I'm terrible with the shirts.
Yeah.
Derbyshire?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not British. Yes. Anyway, he does do it there, but here in here in Netherfield, he does not.
Right. And I do want to discuss that when we get to Pemberley. But what I do want to talk about is how stark this thing is that happens at the ball. It's like he walks in and everyone sees how stately and wealthy he is. And that suddenly the whole room thinks that he must be even more agreeable than Bingley because of prejudice, because of some completely arbitrary things that they've decided about him. And basically, his only real crime that is stated at that thing wasn't even that he wasn't talking to people; is that he wasn't dancing. That's the only thing that, in the moment, while we're still at that ball, is discussed as his crime. And then it says, his character was decided. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world, and everyone hoped that he would never come again. Like, the room just turned on him.
Yeah, that's very true.
And then we are going forward with this idea of him, like completely based on this one element of like, yes, I'm sure there was a mix of like him being shy and awkward and him saying, hey, I'm visiting my friend. Like I owe nothing to these people.
Not my circus, not my monkeys.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he does say
not
the
my
horrible
peasants.
Right, exactly. He does say the horrible thing about Lizzie. So that is legitimate. Like that is on his scorecard as like
rude.
Bad Darcy. You
Bad
did a
Darcy.
bad thing, right? But immediately after that, and this is we're going to have to talk about the narrator too, but immediately after that, Lizzie's like, she's having fun with it. And then she's going all over that room just like, let's have some fun and mock this dude. And she's just doing that all over the place.
Is that good?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, good. Thank you. You're smiling so much. I was like, I feel like this is bad about Elizabeth, and I don't like that part. Okay,
no, that's
wonderful.
bad. That's bad behavior. But that's what I'm
no,
saying.
I would agree.
Is that like
you seem so delighted? I was like, oh no,
well,
we're going to disagree
I am delighted
on
because
so
I
many
feel like I'm doing a
things.
really good job of my defense of Darcy here.
Oh, sure.
That basically the whole neighborhood decides he is away, and then throughout the book, everything from the neighborhood, from Elizabeth, from everyone pretty much except Charlotte, is them working on confirmation bias. Like from that moment on,
I'm
like,
interested that you said Charlotte, not Jane. I feel like Jane is the only one who has no. Okay, what was that?
I just don't.
You just
really
gestured wildly. You just threw your hands in the air. Oh, Jane.
Oh,
goddamn Jane.
Jane's cute.
Cute.
I just don't think Jane's that interesting. Honestly, I really don't.
That is what I find interesting about Jane. Why is she here? Like, is she truly supposed to be a flawless paragon of a perfect human, or is... You're making faces again. It's an audio.
I know.
This is an audio medium,
I feel
Daphne.
very
Work
strongly
with me
about
here.
these things, so I have to be expressive in my face about them. The one book that maybe we should have done a vlog so that everyone could see my wacky faces I'm making about everything. Why does Jane exist? Why do you think Jane exists? I'll tell you why I think Jane exists after that, if you'd like. I have opinions, I guess.
I have opinions too. I don't think you're going to like them. I think that there's a lot of social commentary that's happening in the book, and I think that Jane and Bingley are being shown as, I suppose, as the ought tos, maybe, like we ought to all behave in such a fashion. We ought to all behave in such a way.
I don't think I agree with you on that. At first,
I was worried that Jane would not grow at all. And then I was going to be really at a loss of what to do with her. But we get that lovely letter towards the end when she talks about that she hopes that things will be smoothed over with Caroline Bingley once she sees how very much in love the two of them are, but their relationship will never be the same, which is enough growth for me, for her to not just say, oh, come and walk all over me again, and I'll just be a complete doormat. So
you think that that Jane Austen is proposing them as what society thinks is the ought to, or that the book thinks is the ought to?
What the book thinks is the ought to. That she stands in contrast, because it would be one thing if Jane were just a total pushover and just trying to be nice to everybody all the time at whatever cost to anyone. That's very different. But we don't see that from Jane. We have that lovely moment when Wickham first starts spreading all of the rumors about Darcy. And the whole neighborhood, all of Meryton and Longbourn is like, oh, well, we all hate Darcy and we all love Wickham. And Jane she doesn't just sigh into her knitting and say, well, people, probably oughtn't to think such things. But she actually calls them out. We hear that she pleads with the neighborhood to give the benefit of the doubt and to say, we cannot make a judgment here. We don't actually know what's going on.
Well, and she defends Darcy as well to Lizzie, that she says that Miss Bingley had said that he's actually quite lively when he's amongst his people.
Mm-hmm. That
he doesn't speak much with strangers. Like, she's the first person who says this, that he doesn't speak much with strangers, but he does very much with his acquaintances.
Jane is truly non-judgmental, and she also shuts down gossip. When people come to her for the purpose of gossip, she corrects them every time. Mm-hmm. Even Elizabeth. And Elizabeth loves gossip. She's a little gossip monger. I mean, I like her, don't get me wrong, but she is a gossip monger.
She is.
Yeah.
I know, and
it's a problem.
Okay, so I'll first say what I think about Jane. I don't feel like the book is holding Jane up as the ideal. I think that the book is holding Jane up as a foil to Lizzie.
I wouldn't even say, I was going to say that's closer. Not even an ideal, but a contrast, a stark contrast.
Exactly.
And not even just to Lizzie, though. I think to everybody. Oh, sure. To society, again, to the way that gossip works.
Absolutely. I just, the book is about Lizzie. Like, this is Lizzie's book. Right. Sure. So I think that Jane exists because Lizzie thinks she's so wonderful. And so she is part of Lizzie's process of finding herself. Like, that Lizzie thinks Jane's so wonderful, but I think that she thinks what Jane is unattainable for herself. And she then, part of her process is to find that there is a space between the way she Lizzie herself is, and the way Jane is, that is actually the road that ultimately works for her.
Right.
But I don't think that Jane is held up. Like, it's not like a situation where, like, Lizzie had to become Jane.
No.
It's that she had Jane as a foil to just remind us, like, because it's so easy. Again, this thing about, the Lizzie Bennet fandom. Like, it's so easy because she's so fun and and such an attractive character. Like, it's just very fun to be in Lizzie's head. It's really fun to experience. It's very easy to read this book and just completely identify with Lizzie. And I think that Jane exists to remind us also, the same way she reminds Lizzie, that maybe there are other ways to look at these things, and maybe there's other ways to be. But I don't think she's held up as an ideal exactly. I think she's just held up as an alternative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
Yeah, we really are just going over the place. I'm going to give up on any structure to this. But like, what was really interesting to me about who Lizzie is and this whole thing with gossip is that we are also led to believe, because she's her father's favorite and because she has a lot of traits of her father and she's so disdainful of her mother, I think the book is toying with us in that way as well, that we're supposed to feel like she's like her father and not like her mother. But she actually has so many of her mother's traits.
Oh, of course.
Especially
yeah,
the gossip.
Yes. Also, her father is kind of the worst, and I dislike him very strongly.
Yes. Well, that is another interesting thing, is that I feel like I've had many conversations with people who think her mother is the worst and her father's awesome. And I'm just like, I almost feel like her parents are both the worst in their own ways, and they both represent the worst aspects of Lizzie.
I think that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, we'll have to, because I do really want to talk about her and Catherine de Bourgh, so I'd want to go back to talking about her parents when we get there. But yes,
okay.
Her mother is a gossip. Her mother has no restraint, obviously. Like, Darcy is 100% right about her. And her father is also awful because, what the fuck, dude? Like, your family's going to be in a shitload of trouble when you die, and he just can't be bothered. Also, who talks about their children like that?
No, he's terrible. I don't like him at all. Yeah, he's quite rude about the family. He's rude about his wife. Even the way that he favors Lizzie is really about seeing the qualities of himself in her more than the other children. So it's a very sort of narcissistic appreciation for her anyway.
Well, and also favoring children. Generally.
Is also just bad. Yes.
Right.
Picking favorites and then just letting all your other kids know, yes, but this one's my favorite though. All the rest of you are very silly girls.
That's also the one thing that both parents have in common. Like, the mother definitely
they both
favors Lydia.
And Jane for being the prettiest and the one that's the most sure to get them all out of this pickle. But.
Sure, but Jane, right. Again, I think both parents this is part of this place that Jane holds in the book. Like, both parents just assume that Jane is perfect, based on the fact that she's polite and she's pretty. And that, again, there is a gender conversation to have there. And we will have to talk about all of these, kind of the archetypes of these girls. But then beyond the, general adoration of Jane, which seems everyone has, there's then each of them picked. You're right. They picked the child that is most like them.
Yes.
Or that they shaped to be most like them. That they saw that spark of being like them and then fanned those flames.
Right. Gave a bunch of positive reinforcement.
Which feels almost like part of a domestic battle between the Bennett parents for what is the way life should look like, because they clearly do not share that. I mean, and this comes back to In Sense and Sensibility, like that trope of like the kind of grouchy dad, kind of grouchy husband, and the absurd wife.
Yes.
Which, yeah, there are a list of questions I would love to ask Jane Austen, and one of them is like, why that? Why do we do this over and over again?
Yeah.
Like, why are we?
I feel like she must have witnessed it pretty strongly. I could be wrong, but
she must have. I mean, again, it was a world of where a lot of people didn't marry for love. We're gonna have to get into that as well. I mean, part of me really appreciates how. I mean, I said this when we talked about Sense and Sensibility. Part of me loves that she is very critical of women, in addition to being very in favor of their well-being a lot of the time. But there are some moments where I feel like Jane Austen's really doing low blows. Like, she's just like easy target. We'll throw this in.
Yes, it's interesting. This is the thing that I remember most, actually, about my first read of Pride and Prejudice. And I ended up changing my mind on it. But I remember saying very early on in the first couple of chapters, with the first ball, I think, that it felt to me that not only Lizzie, but specifically the narrator, and therefore probably Jane Austen, seemed very hard on women. Except that then we get that speech later from Caroline Bingley, of all people, saying that Elizabeth strikes her as one of those people who is very hard on women on her own sex in order to lead her, make herself look better, which clearly then Jane Austen must be very sensible of if she's putting that particular dialogue in Caroline Bingley's mouth.
I love that when Caroline says that, because the irony of her saying that is that Lizzie was actually defending women and saying, why on earth are you expecting so much of our poor sex? And Caroline was saying that while actually doing it. And that then ties Caroline to Mrs. Bennet, who does it all the time. And it was just so interesting. But yeah, we should discuss that. Like, I don't know if we should call the narrator Jane Austen.
I don't think we can.
Right. I think the narrator, again, like in Sense and Sensibility, is a character. And I think like if it was Jane Austen, that character of narrator would have to be more similar to herself from book to book. And I don't think she's the same person. I don't think the narrator is the same person in each book.
It seems to me that the narrator is always very functional. And because of that, it is a character, just from a writer's perspective. Like, you have to write that as a character, I think. But she specifically, because she can be so snarky. she can. And also willfully misleading, often.
Yes. Yeah. And this book in particular, because part of it is about prejudice. I mean, that's very important in this.
She sets that confirmation bias that we were talking about earlier. She sets that in motion for us early on in the book. I feel like the narrator makes Darcy almost impossible to like in those first opening scenes if you do not know what he becomes.
Right.
Now, granted, we're all so spoiled on Darcy. Like, everybody knows that, Fitzwilliam Darcy. Everybody knows that he's supposed to be this paragon of manliness, but...
Which is funny. I don't see him as that either. It's so interesting.
I don't. No, I don't.
I love him. I don't love him, I feel like, for the reasons that most people love him.
No. Well, I'm just talking about in like
I know.
the most broad pop culture, what Darcy represents sort of way.
Right.
Which is the love interest, the good guy, the one that you hope the heroine ends up with, the misunderstood, sweet, gentle soul. Sure.
Yeah, I don't see Darcy as any of those things, but I know that you're saying that culture sees him that way, not us.
Just the culture, yeah, not us.
See,
specifically.
But it's no, and you're probably right. I mean, God knows when my first read was, and I don't remember it. I think on second read and later reads, the narrator is giving the neighborhood so much shit for what they're doing to him but you don't necessarily see that. And it's just, this is what I always love about Jane Austen's narrators. Is that they're always very clever, and they're always doing stuff that you may not notice on first read, but like the sharp criticism is always there when you reread. That you that kind of starts to like blossom through the story as you're like, oh, the narrator's actually criticizing that person or those people, not the person I originally thought.
What do you think about the narrator's criticism of Elizabeth?
I love it. Because I feel like the narrator is like me, that the narrator loves Lizzie and is also just like, Lizzie, my sweet, you're letting me down right now.
Yes, exactly so. Yeah. No, I feel the same way. Particularly, I think it comes across most clearly about her parents and about Charlotte Lucas.
Well, and also about Darcy, but yes, I agree with you. So let's talk about
she shows her hand less with Darcy, but I could be wrong.
I think the narrator is very clearly sometimes saying Lizzie's feeling this and like is reporting it, but at the same time telling you, wink, wink, Lizzie's feeling this because Lizzie wants to feel this.
So. No, that is very true. That is very true.
Yeah, it's very subtle. I mean, I feel like the narrator is less present here than in Sense and Sensibility. On first glance. Like, that's the thing. It's just like, I feel like you have more in Sense and Sensibility moments of the narrator really stepping back and being a narrator. And here it's less clear when you're in Lizzie's head and when you're in the narrator's.
Sure.
than there was with Eleanor. Like with Eleanor, I felt like there were moments, we talked about that, like there are moments where you're like, whose thoughts am I hearing right now? But I feel like here the narrator is somehow closer to Lizzie than the narrator was to Eleanor, but at the same time more divorced from her emotionally.
Yes.
Like that she's
That's a good way to put it.
Because the narrator was a little bit not, pretty much not critical of Eleanor. Like,
no, remember we couldn't decide where the narrator landed. So, which is one of the things that we really liked.
And here I think that the narrator does, like, loves Lizzie and is really annoyed with Lizzie sometimes.
Yes. Yes. I get that same feeling.
Yeah.
And that she teases her quite lovingly. She
does.
just like teases and mocks her.
Which is Lizzie's style, which I love
it's lovely.
Yeah, I think you just got to the core of my favorite thing about Jane Austen is that it's a style. I mean, I think I did tweet that this week, that it was like pretty much everything I learned about how to lovingly mock people, which is something I like to do, is I learned from Jane Austen.
Well, I do like, though, and I wonder if I feel like this must have been true to Jane Austen's character personally, because I love that moment right after Darcy and Elizabeth have been reconciled. And she wants to tease him about Bingley and what an invaluable friend Bingley must be for being such a pushover and so easy to control. But she thought to herself, she checked herself, the narrator said, because it was too soon to tease him in that fashion. And he was not.
He hadn't yet learned
he had not
to be laughed at. I love that. I love that. I mean, the funny thing is, the truly funny thing about that, I mean, that was a beautiful moment in Lizzie's mind. I actually believe that that's why Darcy fell in love with her.
Because she teased him?
Yep.
And mocked him?
Yep.
Interesting.
This is my belief. My belief is that when Jane was sick at Netherfield, that's when it happened. And she wasn't doing it lovingly. She wasn't lovingly mocking him. She was. And I think that's what did it for him. I mean, yes, fine eyes. She looked really good after a long walk with her muddy dress. But I think what it was is that he had lived in a world of deference. Everyone deferred to him.
Yes.
Even his friends, his sister, everyone. He didn't have his parents anymore. Think about, I mean, again, this whole idea of a formerly feudal setup. Like he was at the top of a hierarchy, and it's lonely up there.
Yeah, sure. Well, he says to her that she teaches him humility.
But it's not just that. Right. Well, I guess it is that, but I think that it was just honestly really fun for him. And she wasn't doing it to be, I really think so. I think if you look at all of their exchanges, I think he didn't understand it exactly. I think he obviously misjudged her opinion of him, right? We find out that when he proposes. I think that he read this all along as her like mocking to flirt.
Oh, like pulling his pigtails?
Yeah, basically. And she's really good at it. I mean, she's really, really good at it. But yeah, I think that at Netherfield, she's actually doesn't like him, obviously. And she keeps saying, and she doesn't understand him either. Like, it doesn't occur to her. Okay, here we go. Elizabeth, having rather expected to affront him, was amazed at his gallantry. But there was a mixture of sweetness and archness in her manner, which made it difficult for her to affront anyone. See, now we now jumped like within the span of a sentence from what she's
Elizabeth
experiencing
to the narrator. Sure.
And then we switched to Darcy to some extent. And Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her. It's exactly when she's mocking him that he becomes bewitched and is then worried. He said that if it wasn't for her inferiority of station, he would be lost. Like, so that was the first stage. That was the first stage before he actually started really, kind of weighing his feelings versus the problems of her station.
Well, and this is part of, I think, Elizabeth's pride in the best sense, is that she always considers herself equal to the task and equal to the person.
Yes.
She knows how to behave politely and present herself properly and use decorum. Thank you very much. But you're doing it again.
She does it okay. I mean, does she really? I mean, I
think she behaves very well in society.
I think that she behaves in a way that I admire and find fun. I don't think I agree that she behaves according to what was expected of her. I think in Rossings, as much as Lady de Burgh is awful, I think that the way Elizabeth responded, and if we had been in that period, we would have understood that was actually
a bit sassy.
Yep. Was, and again, so yes, I enjoy that. She's definitely someone I would want to watch do that. I find it lovely, but it's exactly that thing. Exactly the way she behaves that I think is what attracts Darcy to her, is her not behaving well according to what she's, the decorum.
Pushing back against societal norms.
Yes, she's pushing against decorum. Again, there's a lot to discuss. Like, I love it. I don't want to afford her this idea that that she knows that she behaves well all the time. She definitely does not.
I think that's right.
And again, my favorite scenes are the ones where she's behaving a little badly. I love those scenes, but I have to also recognize that according to the norms of decorum, she's probably not following them very well.
No, she is certainly no Jane. I think that's very true.
She's certainly no Jane, and right. I mean, again, we have a lot of examples of people not doing that stuff well. So I'm just trying. I'm not even sure.
She pushes back just enough to be charming and delightful and
for the reader,
surprising
for the reader.
Well, and I think for most of the people that she encounters too, like not for people who are Catherine de Bourgh. No one is going to delight Catherine de Bourgh except for Mr. Collins, and nobody wants to be Mr. Collins. But she has this sort of sparkle, I suppose.
She does have sparkle. Well, so okay, you want to discuss this a little? Like, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm just not sure we have, like, in Sense and Sensibility, we have all of these moments of seeing social interaction where people are all doing very good decorum. We don't really get a lot of examples of those in Pride and Prejudice.
No.
It's so interesting.
I think,
so,
again, the closest that we get is Jane and Bingley. But I think that was a really good point that you said, and that Bingley, when he left Netherfield should have let
right. Right, that's true. I guess Bingley, I'm just trying to think of like actual conversations where we get extended periods of people doing good decorum. And
her aunt and uncle, maybe, when they go on vacation?
Yeah. That's true.
Or when really throughout.
Her aunt and uncle and Darcy talking, I think, is a really, and her and Elizabeth, when they're all talking to each other, that is true. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it this way. Like, we always have someone kind of throwing a wrench in just, what in Sense and Sensibility we see so often of these, sometimes awkward, but generally, I don't want to call them pleasant because they're not really necessarily conversations I would want to be in, but they're conversations that it's like where everyone's doing what they're supposed to do. Pride and Prejudice, we get a whole lot of not that. Because somebody, like Caroline Bingley, obviously not, because she's got her agenda.
Right.
And we've got Lizzie being sassy at people. So,
I think that her sass, though, is humor most of the time. She's never trying to offend. She's trying to, I think, lighten things up. She's trying, or that's how that's what I get from her most of the time, is that particularly, even I think at Rosings, she went toe-to-toe with Catherine de Bourgh, I think. I don't think that she tried to shut her down or shut her up until she did out there in the garden, which was amazing.
But it's actually inappropriate for her to go toe-to-toe with Catherine de Bourgh.
I would agree that it was socially inappropriate.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that the way that she did it was not like snarky, sassy. It was the kind of person that you would imagine was invited to a lot of dinner parties because she made things interesting.
Right, but not...
Does that make sense?
Well, some kinds of dinner parties. She's someone I would want to invite to dinner. Again, okay. I'm not sure. Would she have been invited to... I mean, certainly in her town, she was well liked. But we are, we're made to understand that is a small village and that people didn't really know how to be cultured. That's very clear.
Like, even on their best behavior, there was still some guesswork.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. And also with Darcy, I think she is trying to hurt him. I mean, the irony of her trying to hurt him is that he thinks she's being clever and playful when she's actually trying to be quite harsh. And that's what I love about the piano scene. I mean, I love the piano scene because all of the dialogue is so, sorry, we're at Rossing's now. We're just jumping all over the place. I feel like we have to like give some markers for listeners. At Rossing's, when they have the scene where she's with Colonel Fitzwilliam and with Darcy, and Fitzwilliam, now he might be the person that I would consider the ideal in the book. Because he's a person who does show responsibility towards others and is wealthy and is pleasant. Mm-hmm. Like, he might be the only person who really is covering all of those bases at one time. I mean, he also doesn't have the level of responsibility that Darcy has, but he has quite a bit. I mean, he is also responsible for Darcy's sister.
That is true. He's a colonel, is that right?
Yeah, he's a colonel because he's a younger son, so he wouldn't inherit all of the family riches. So he had to do, second sons have to do something else.
Right.
But I do think that Lizzie is trying to sting Darcy, and he doesn't see it that way.
Sting is a good word.
He sees it as a tete-a-tete that's really exciting for him. And I think that she's trying to be a little bit more harsh than he realizes she is. And I think that that's also a great sign of what's interesting about them as a couple, is that she has this urge to be this person, right? Like, we don't believe that Elizabeth Bennet's going to somehow stop being this sharp wit who likes to mock people and stuff like that. But she has someone who finds that intellectually exciting. Again, I don't think Darcy ever saw anything like that. And that's part of why my argument about her not really following decorum. I think he likes that. I think he really, it's fresh and new for him. And he just never expected to find a person to marry who would engage with him in that way.
Right. They're both very individualistic in that sense.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, I mean, for me, my favorite line, I think, in the whole thing is when she starts giving him shit and he's just like, I'm not afraid of you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And he's flirting. Like, he's like, she's telling
doing
him
the best he can anyway.
Right.
Sure.
She's telling him he's awful. And he thinks she's flirting, and he's flirting back at her. And he just, poor dear, he doesn't get it at all. Like, she's giving him hell. And he doesn't get it at all. It's so cute. I think it's very cute.
Huh. I don't think I've read it that way. I just feel like Elizabeth delights herself, delights in anything ridiculous. Yes. Is that what we hear about?
Yes.
Like, I think that everything she has to say, if it stings Darcy, so much the better, but I don't think that that's her goal or her aim, or certainly not to side with Caroline. I think that she's just amusing herself. And she's amusing herself at his expense, which he doesn't. No, I think he would even notice that. I think he knows that.
Oh, see, I think she's much more angry than you think she is. She's that one snubbing that he did of her at the first ball stung her so hard, and
which is her portion of the pride that blocks her, that makes her prejudiced.
I see that as the prejudice, right? So she had this one moment where he did a shitty thing. And then this is why I see prejudice as very important, and as the Elizabeth thing. He did one shitty thing. She convinced herself based on that he is an awful person.
Right.
And then he
says to her in the proposal that he hurt her pride that day.
Yes, he's right. Mm-hmm. Yes, he's completely right. I mean, she brings it up. Let me try to find the quote there. Oh, here we go. So this is when Lizzie and Charlotte were talking about. Charlotte says, his pride, said Miss Lucas, does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there's an excuse for it. One cannot wonder that so very fine a young man, with family, fortune, everything in his favor, should think highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud. That is very true, replied Elizabeth, and I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really see what happens. Again, I'm going to bring up confirmation bias. Like, she decided it was a lot easier for her to blame him. Again, he's not faultless. It was a crappy thing he did. He shouldn't have said that. Mm-hmm. But it's much easier for her to then decide he's a horrible person.
Of course.
And then just continue down that road. And I agree with you that I think Lizzie uses her sharp wit to amuse herself, but I'm much less generous to her about how she talks to him. I think that she, every time that she can say hurtful things to him, it helps her feel better about that one moment. And I think she's very invested in that. I think she's extremely invested in that. And part of that might be being, you know, a second sister and all of that stuff. Like she has lived in Jane's shadow. So like the last thing she needed was to be so, you know, blatantly snubbed.
Of course.
And I think
and publicly embarrassed.
Right. I think, right. That's true. Because everyone was talking about it. And her mother continues to talk about it.
Yes. On and on. Thank you, Miss Bennett.
I really think that she is, again, I don't think that she thinks she has that much power to hurt him because she doesn't know how he feels.
Sure.
Like it doesn't occur to
that's
her.
Why I think that sting is a good word. Yeah.
Right. But I don't think that she's just amusing herself. I think she would like very much to continue this narrative she has in her head of how awful he is.
And to put him in his place, perhaps.
Right. And I just think there's like a bit of a misunderstanding happening there, that she's doing this with actual malice and he thinks this is just playful.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's how it works.
I think
for
it's
me.
very clear that she means him harm by the time she's turning him down in the proposal. Like she's that point, she's very much.
Then he deserved it. I actually, I have a much bigger
God.
problem with his proposal than with his snub at the ball.
Truly awful.
Yes,
truly
his proposal is
terrible.
truly awful. Okay, let's get there soon. I just wanted to talk about a few more things. I think there were actually some quotes. It's funny, like you said, that one quote came out of Caroline Bingley's mouth. There's another quote that like I always remembered but didn't notice whose mouth it came from. This is from Mary.
Mary. I know the one. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves. Vanity to what we would have others think of us. And I think that's very interesting, especially because I just read the other thing about that he mortified her pride. I don't think he mortified her pride. He mortified her vanity.
Oh, sure.
And that's the big difference.
Interesting. Okay.
Because I don't think Elizabeth's opinion of herself was hurt by him snubbing her at the ball. But her sense
that played on her insecurities a little bit of being second sister.
I mean, I guess I did just say that, but I think that ultimately what you said, the fact that it was public is what really, if it had been her own thing, she might have been, you know, had to think it through and stuff like that. But the fact that it was public, to
brush off.
Right. The fact that it was public, the fact that her only way to counteract it was to then circulate around the room and gossip about how proud and awful he is, because she had to publicly counteract that. And again, this is part of this whole continuing thing. This goes to a thing at the end. We will get to the proposal, but now I want to discuss something at the end, which is I really like. And this came up when we were discussing Howard's End. And I guess this is going to be something that I'm just going to keep bringing up. I think I brought it up in Sensibility too. This idea of of social interaction sometimes being like warfare.
Societal interactions is warfare.
Right. Well, not warfare necessarily, but the idea of like, what is a hero's journey for a woman?
Oh.
At the end of Howard's End, Helen calls Margaret a hero for having pulled everyone together, for having gotten them through all of this. And so I talked about that, like, what is heroism for a woman? And it's the same thing with Eleanor. Like, I'm just very interested right now, like in a world, in culture, in society, in the places that women were allowed and where they weren't allowed, women couldn't go to war. Women couldn't have a hero story like what we usually think of as a hero story. So I keep kind of investigating these books for like, what would be heroism within the realms that women are allowed to inhabit. And so there's a scene near the end when they are at Pemberley, when they're there with and the Bingleys are there already. So there's that they're like having like kind of the women are having tea together, And when Darcy shows up, Caroline had been had been trying to undermine Lizzie the whole time. But when Darcy shows up, that's when she brings up Wickham.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. Can I read a quote from there?
Of course.
Okay. So it says, so Caroline brought up Wickham. And then it says about Lizzie, but exerting herself vigorously to repel the ill-natured attack, she presently answered the question in a tolerably detached tone. While she spoke, an involuntary glance showed her Darcy, with heightened complexion, earnestly looking at her, and his sister overcome with confusion and unable to lift up her eyes. So that moment really struck me as something that I feel like is actually in this book throughout, like that social interactions are sometimes like this, this not a cold war even, like a war that's happening under the surface of what everyone's saying. There are all of these battles happening all the time. And that moment was amazing because Caroline attacked and Lizzie found for the first time the way to defend people. She's defending Georgiana by deflecting, by making this conversation end, because it was so difficult for Georgiana to, and Caroline didn't know that, but it was so difficult for Georgiana to hear Wickham spoken of. And I thought it was really interesting because we had seen Lizzie kind of do battle by being sharp and being clever and being being on the attack a lot of the time with Darcy.
Yes, sure.
And it was so interesting for me to see this really kind of using almost, battle-like language to discuss this exchange that if you didn't know what was, if you didn't know what was going on through this whole story, but we do because the narrator and Darcy have told us, you wouldn't even have noticed the amount of the level of battle that was happening there. And that she had finally learned to use subtlety and deflection not reacting to something
right
as a way of doing battle.
That's very wise. Yeah.
So I just feel like that became Elizabeth's heroism, was that she had been battling for her own vanity all this time, and that she learned to have responsibility for others, truly, not just talking about it, but truly do battle in these social interactions that are women's warfare to some extent, doing it to protect others.
Right. Interesting. I like that.
That just really struck me. And it was something that I wanted to bring up. I don't think we do have, we have the things with Eleanor and Lucy in Sense and Sensibility, but I think it's this book where you really start getting into the ways in which women in particular are fighting for whatever they can get. And a lot of it is happening in these very, very minute, subtle things in these social exchanges. Mm-hmm. But they are doing battle with each other. Like she and Caroline, absolutely. For sure. I mean,
oh God, yes.
I mean, in the beginning, Caroline was the only one fighting for something, but it was always a battle. And it's all so, there's just something I don't like the situation that makes women have to scrap with each other for whatever they can get. But I love the depiction of it. I just felt like Jane Austen just really gets that.
Yes. Yes. And she definitely shows, I think, those women who pull their claws out and those women who instead, put a shield up.
Yeah. Right. Right. And I think Lizzie was in a different way than Caroline, but she was more of a claws person to begin with.
To begin with, sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't directed at women because she just didn't give a shit, honestly. She really didn't. I mean, she didn't
Well, she was peerless.
Right.
In her community.
Right. She was absolutely peerless in her community, but she also didn't want Darcy. So she wasn't going to fight.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. Oh, gosh. Remember when she first meets Catherine de Bourgh's daughter, whose name I forget, doesn't matter, but the cousin, and she says so awfully and harshly that she seems like such a cold, sallow thing, and they'll do very well together. And God, she's very terrible in the beginning.
Yeah. Well,
she sees it and grows, so I love her, but whew, that was harsh.
Yeah, I mean, It is funny. I mean, I do think that the narrator does mock her exactly about this, is that she does protest too much about Darcy. It's just like, that guy means nothing to me, except I'm just going to, like, everything I'm going to think about, I'm going to actually bring back to him.
Yes.
Like, it's just exactly like, so. I'm just going to constantly think about him all of the time.
Right.
But I'm thinking about him with hatred, so therefore I don't care about him.
Right.
Oh, Lizzie, you dear. Alrighty. What should we talk about next? Should we talk about that? I mean, you know, I could just read the whole piano scene because I love it so much.
That is lovely. Yeah, their little verbal tete-a-tete is lovely. Even if we see it slightly differently, I think it's just a gorgeous scene.
Right, and we do have to give Lizzie credit. Like the line where he says, you know, that I'm not good at people, and she's like, talks about practice. She's like, I'm not particularly good at piano, but I recognize that that's because I just didn't practice enough.
Exactly so.
She is right.
She's absolutely right about that. I think she nails it on the head. And then he says something about her, which I think he doesn't get right. What is it that he says about her when he's trying to do the same thing?
He gets stuff right too. I mean, he
definitely does some of it.
I think both of them are hitting the nail on the head the whole time. I'm so curious what you think he got wrong.
You find great enjoyment in occasionally professing opinions which in fact are not your own.
Oh, I buy that. You think he's wrong about that?
Which one specifically?
I think that is referring to gossip. I mean, I think that has to do with that she is swayed by general opinion.
Oh, so more parroting general opinion than saying something that is outright insincere.
Right.
That makes more sense then. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I thought he was trying to call her out on insincerity, and I was like, I don't think that's accurate.
Right. I mean, it's not insincerity. He is calling her out. I mean, again, that might tie into what I do believe is that he doesn't quite understand how that might, I mean, another way to read that is that it goes with what I'm saying, that he doesn't understand how actually critical she's being of him. So he maybe thinks that she doesn't have as strong opinions about him. That's
an interesting way to look at that.
Right.
Sure.
So there probably are many ways to look at that. I mean, I guess that's true. I think from his perspective, he maybe is wrong because he thinks that she doesn't dislike him as much as she professes. Oh. I think from my perspective, he's right because I think that she's very easily swayed by the general wave of opinion.
Right.
And
that's
that
definitely so.
Is not saying.
Which is interesting because she doesn't seem to know that about herself at all.
No, she has no introspection about that whatsoever.
Yeah. She gets it later, though.
She does. She does. Right. Mm-hmm. So we're still pre-proposal and letter talking about them at this point. And yeah, I think that Lizzie, I think she has moments. I mean, she does have moments before the proposal where she does doubt herself a little bit in her adamant dislike of him. She does have these fleeting moments of that. I mean, again, you know what he's talking about? He's talking about Wickham. We haven't even talked about Wickham.
Do we have to talk about Wickham?
Well, we don't. No, we really don't have to talk about Wickham. No, honestly, it's funny. Wickham is despicable. Wickham is a lot of things. Wickham exists so that we will, you know, the whole idea of that one person has all of the nobility. I forget which word they use. All of the honor, all of the appearance of. Right. One person
honor?
Has all of the honor
or
nobility, and the other one has the appearance of. I forget. Okay, I have that quote written down, obviously, but I don't know.
That's close enough to it, though.
Yes, but the idea that one person has all of the good traits and the other one just seems to, and that's important. I mean, this goes to prejudice.
No, absolutely.
This idea.
I think it's all over the book too, because it's also there with I think Catherine de Bourgh is that way too. Like she has all the appearance of civility and being an excellent member of the aristocracy, but actually she's just got her nose in everybody's business in a very Mrs. Bennet-like fashion, just in a different part of society.
Right. But I think that what's more important is not the essence of the person there, but the judgment of the people around them. Like what's important about that statement is not actually about Darcy and Wickham, which is when you compare it to Catherine de Bourgh, you're talking about who the people really are. What's important about that statement is prejudice, is the idea that we are so quickly, that everyone was so quick to decide that people who seem good are good and people who seem not good are not good. That the important part, I mean, of course, who people are is important, but I'm saying what's important in that statement is the idea of prejudice, is saying that we, reading books by their covers is not the appropriate way to proceed in life.
Right. Correct.
And that, that is what I think is really the important. I mean, again, Catherine, she's just god awful, but
she is awful.
But she's not always wrong. And I want to talk about that too. I mean, I think that a lot of the things she has to say about the Bennets as a family are actually pretty spot on, even though she says them, again, she says them in an obnoxious, hateful way.
Right.
But but what she's saying is not wrong. Like when she and Lizzie are having that first conversation and she's saying, what, all 5 of you out at once? She wasn't wrong.
No, it's true.
There
That's
are
not how
reasons.
things are done. Mm-hmm.
Well, again, and this goes back to in Sense and Sensibility, we talked about how when we were talking about Willoughby, like that a lot of these cultural restraints seem limiting of women, but they actually existed to some extent to protect them because women weren't free and didn't have power. All of this stuff about honor existed to protect them. So the same idea that you wouldn't have all 5 sisters out at once because you would marry the older ones, and then the older ones would introduce the younger ones into society and be an added layer of protection for them.
Right.
That, obviously if all 5 girls are going to balls at the same time, even if you had a mother who actually paid attention to this stuff, it would be much harder to monitor what's happening with all 5 of them at the same time. I find it fascinating in later reads where I can kind of get over just hating Catherine de Bourgh. And again, mostly I hate her. Mostly she's wrong about things because she really represents the worst side of the history of the aristocracy. But again, when she's talked about the piano and the art and all of this, and like, did you not have a tutor? Did you not, all of these things? Again, she wasn't wrong. Like Lizzie held up as something she saw as good in her family, that her parents allowed these 5 girls to do what the spirit moved them to do. We have like the one way of looking at that of like Lydia obviously never did anything productive, and therefore her focus was completely on flirting and soldiers and such. But we also have this idea, this goes back to what I was saying about Bingley and Darcy, is that like if you're really just existing based on what gives you joy and pleasure and suits you, I think there's a bit of a criticism here for that. Like Lizzie is that person also. She's done whatever suits her. She's practiced piano as much as suits her and didn't do other things. And she read a lot because that happened to suit her. But that's just luck of the draw, you know? And there's no way to come out of this without seeing the parents, the Bennet parents, as completely irresponsible parents.
Right. Well, and the narrator, I think, makes no bones about that ever.
Right. No, right. But I think that there's a larger discussion here of existing just for your own pleasure versus existing with some sense of a larger responsibility.
What is your sense of Darcy and Elizabeth and Jane and Bingley in their relation to the Bennets after the marriages, I should say?
Oh, like who ends up coming to visit them and stuff like that?
Right. It's made pretty clear when right before they get married, that they're both thrilled that they'll basically just not have to deal with this family anymore. And then Catherine de Bourgh says, you won't deal with us anymore because we won't have you, basically. So they kind of get those strings cut, I feel like. But we hear that Kitty is made, more sensible by being in their company. Right. But I think so we get Kitty.
The father comes and visits quite a bit. I think the mother visits too, or the mother goes and visits Jane more, I think is what's right.
Yeah. Until she drives even Bingley out of his mind, because even he has a limit, it turns out.
No, and I like that because for me that felt like healing this idea, that Darcy wouldn't be able to associate with her family. And that's part of his learning curve, like that he first realizes that the aunt and uncle are very pleasant, and he was like surprised to find that. Yeah, they're wonderful. They are actually. Okay, Colonel Fitzwilliam and them. Those are the people that are like, those are our gold standard for behavior.
Right, sure.
Yeah, for me, that felt like it was more about Darcy, but maybe it is also about Lizzie. Like, because I actually get a little annoyed with Lizzie right at the end, like right when he does propose to her, and she's like, "Get me the fuck out of here!" Like
Which I can't blame her for, but yeah.
No, I can't blame her for it, but I feel like she almost went a little too far in taking his criticisms of her family. Again, all just criticisms, but I feel like she almost too much adopted them for my taste.
Yeah, well, and I think that we just kind of disagree here on how much I think that the two of them both pick and choose which parts of culture and society and even responsibility that they decide is for them.
That's interesting. See, you might be right. I mean, I don't think Lizzie's very good at responsibility at all.
Well, she did go to her father to argue for her sisters that he put his foot down.
No, she has her moments, but I think that ultimately, she's way better at like recognizing how other people are being.
She's way better at judging. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, she's way better at seeing how other people are being irresponsible or outside of the boundaries of what they should be than herself. I mean, again, the moment where I feel like Lizzie starts to truly feel responsibilities, that scene with Georgiana and Caroline, that was the moment where I feel like, because even when she's arguing to her father about the younger sisters, she's not doing it for the younger sisters' sake, it's for Jane.
Right. Yeah. No, that is true. That is true.
It's
for both
because
of them, really. Because by then she's
started to think differently about Darcy, but she didn't believe that they.
Still, she knows that it's ruining her chances for making a good match.
Right. So, and that is a legitimate thing, and I think it would be inappropriate for this book not to bring up. It brings up multiple times. Another moment where Catherine de Bourgh is actually correct is that had Lydia not, had this not all gotten tidied up with this marriage, it would have ruined.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for sisters who have no wealth in their future, it took away the one possibility that they had for, I'm not going to say survival. Again, we're talking about people of a certain class. There were people who are much less well off. But again, the conversation with Charlotte brings it up. Like they're not really in a position to like support themselves. So because they weren't trained for that, they didn't exist in that world.
Right. Yeah.
All they've got going for them is some amount of haphazard education in the case of the Bennett system. It isn't going to get them very far.
No.
So yeah,
and they are terrible with money, too.
I still think that Darcy feels responsibility where it's important for him to feel responsibility. His responsibility is to his tenants, is to his subordinates, and I don't ever see an inkling that he shirked that responsibility. Whether or not he hangs out with his aunt just doesn't seem to me... Again, she is of a higher status to him, so he doesn't really... He owes her deference. He doesn't owe. He doesn't have the same kind of responsibility to her that he does to his tenants.
Certainly not. No.
And as far as familial contact, that's also of a different sort of. That's a different class of responsibility than someone who does not take care of their subordinates properly.
Right.
So yes, I mean, I'm not saying that's not significant. I don't think it. I have a hard time accusing Darcy of not honoring his responsibilities because, his main.
No, I don't think I would say that. Yeah.
I think Lizzie was never particularly good at it. She learned a little bit from Darcy. Very little bit. And is she ever doing it where she's not got some amount of self-interest? But is anyone, I mean, that's a larger question. Like for Darcy, his self-interest is his pride, like is his sense of himself. And that is part of the motivation for being a good person of the aristocracy.
By his own account, it's his entire motivation.
Right.
At first, before he is taught by Elizabeth.
Oh, you think that his responsibility towards his tenants and such?
That's what he said.
You mean when they're during the discussion in the second proposal?
Yes, the second proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because I think that some of it is actually his nature, and I think that's what we get from Mrs. Reynolds, if that's her name, the servant who speaks about him, that he was just always a good and generous person. That was just innate in him, but that's not what he saw as his motivation when he says that he was brought up to be principled in a very narrow sphere. And when he gets outside of that sphere, he just stops.
Right.
All of it. Just stops caring, his generosity stops, I should say.
Right. That's true. And then he learned from Lizzie to expand that and expand his sense of like who's worthy of it.
Which is lovely.
Yeah, it is lovely. All right. I don't know. Do we have to like go through the parts of the original? I mean, I think everyone agrees that the first proposal sucks.
Oh God, it's so terrible. It's terrible. I mean, she gives as good as she gets, which
she does.
While misinformed, he has coming. But I love that he agrees with her later.
Even if he hadn't done anything wrong before that, the way that he proposes to her is god-awful. I mean, it really is. And he admits that afterwards. Like, it is bad. Really, really
well,
bad.
I love that this sounds terrible, but I love that he looks back at that and is mortified at his own behavior and says, oh God, I can't believe I said it like that.
Right.
That's good, actually. And she does the same thing. You know, she looks back and says, I can't believe, had I been wildly in love, I couldn't have been this blind.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah. They both
botched that one.
Right. They're
equally.
They both did a very bad job.
Yes. Perfect storm of I don't even know what intentions and
Yeah.
Expressions, I suppose.
So how do you feel about the letter?
The letter is very interesting. I feel about the letter much the same way that Darcy does, which is that I admire that he takes the time to write the letter the next day instead of saying everything in that moment because he wants to be certain that he's fair. But I also agree that he's not quite fair yet when he writes the letter. He's still pretty fired up, still pretty, still pretty hot under the collar when he writes it. So it's this is an interesting point, isn't it? The letter is very prideful in that he wants very much to clear his name.
Right.
It would be one thing if he wrote her a letter just, and this is not saying anything ill against Darcy at all. It's just an interesting point about the human condition, is that it would be one thing had he written her a letter that simply apologized and said, you are absolutely right. That was very ungentlemanlike. I said hurtful things and I beg your forgiveness and my most apologies, and go on with your life. But it is very important for him to clear his name. Yeah. He has been ill-judged. And I don't think that that's, again, this is not a judgment call on him at all. But I think that that's very interesting because it can sometimes be a point of virtue, as he said himself. Like, he considered it the more virtuous act to not hide perhaps, but not to disclose Wickham's discretions.
And I completely agree with him. It's not really his story to tell, especially because the strongest part of it is the part about Georgiana, not about himself.
That is true.
Georgiana's story, I mean, again, he trusts Elizabeth to keep that secret.
Yes. Well, but then he second guesses himself on that. We hear from when we get the letter from the aunt who's explaining that Darcy came up and smoothed everything over. And she says he felt that it was his fault that Wickham got this far.
Yeah.
Because he kept it under covers.
That's the moment when I fall in love with Darcy.
Yes.
Because a person who can do the right thing and then still be worried that having done the right thing, they did harm and want to fix that.
Yes. No, I agree. That's the most I like Darcy.
I think it was when we were talking about Sense and Sensibility movie and I said something about Darcy being an honorable man and you gave me a face and I was just like, yeah, he's an honorable man. I mean, he's a lot of other things.
It's true.
But he's totally, I mean, that's the moment for me when he felt the responsibility to fix. And again, there is self-interest in there because he wanted, but he didn't hope. I mean, that was the thing. You always have to remember that when he fixed the thing with Wickham and Lydia, he did not think he had any hope of actually having Elizabeth fall in love with him.
No, he didn't think he could come back from that proposal, which I'm surprised he could,
Right.
to be honest.
Even after the Pemberley bit where they were so
Yes,
lovely with each other,
which
but
is
still.
lovely, yeah.
But
Now, I want to read really quick one of my favorite
Yeah.
quotes from the book that really surprised me, actually. And it's quite early on. And Elizabeth is talking to Jane this might be to her aunt. You know what? I'm just going to say it again. Elizabeth is speaking, and she says, "Without scheming to do wrong or to make others unhappy, there may be error and there may be misery. Thoughtlessness, want of attention to other people's feelings, and want of resolution will do the business."
she could be talking about either of them, huh?
Oh, absolutely. That's why
Love
it's
it.
so gorgeous. This is
Yeah.
just about the human condition.
Yep,
Again,
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the human condition of a person who is deep down a caring person.
Yes.
Because someone like Lydia doesn't actually give a shit. Like, it would never occur to even think about, like, the collateral damage of her.
But that also, I think, speaks very much to Lydia. Like, Lydia, that was absolutely thoughtlessness and want of attention to other people's feelings.
Yeah.
And she did huge damage and never even acknowledged it. She never had any idea.
She never understood it. It's not that
Never
she didn't,
understood it.
It's not
No.
that she didn't acknowledge it to others. It never
Right.
occurred to her.
But the damage was done, is
Right.
the point.
Right. Yes, Lydia is a fascinating character. It's funny because I always we're supposed to dislike her, right?
I sure hope so, because I've known just a couple of people who try to, push to, well, Lydia,
Oh,
she-
I
I'm
don't
like,
defend
no.
Lydia, but there's always a moment where
I
I
cannot defend Lydia. I just can't.
No, I don't defend Lydia, but there's
Oh, okay.
always some moment where, the feminist in me who wants to push back at all of these constraints on women, there's always a split second where I'm like, "You go, girl. You just do your shit," and then I bounce back because she's awful and she hurts other people.
Yeah,
But
is the
I
problem,
do
that it hurts
always
other
have
people.
this
Sure.
split second where I'm just like, "Oh, Lydia, just be Lydia." I mean, she.
Are you familiar with the Buccaneers?
No, but you've talked to me about that before.
I may have.
Yeah.
Oh, the ending scene with the man who plays Wickham, not Wickham, Willoughby in
right.
in Sense and Sensibility. Yes, but there's the one of the very ending scene is like at this lovely, very genteel picnic. He just kind of pulls up in a carriage and looks at the one woman, and she just jumps in there right away. And everyone was like, oh, scandal. They
Right.
moved to South America, go live on a beach somewhere. They're like, forget it. Fuck all of y'all. But the one woman says, I couldn't help cheering for her.
Right.
I sat in my chair. I didn't actually cheer because, goodness, I don't want to put myself in harm's way. But inside, I thought, you go.
Right. So I
It's
don't
lovely.
I'm not actually. So before anyone gets this wrong, I don't actually like Lydia. I'm not,
Oh, no.
I'm not
I
rooting
hear
for
what you're
Lydia.
saying. I think
but
you're
there's
making
always
your
a
point clear.
split second where I'm just
course.
one person is just actually, I mean, again, Jane Austen books, not about that. Jane Austen books, not be your most truest self regardless of the consequences. This
No.
is not what
Yes.
these books are about.
Yes, you do not live in a vacuum.
Right. You get a Lydia so that you can censor her and be like, look how horrible you are. But there's always that split second where I'm just like, look at Lydia. She's just Lydia. She is
that's
all
why-
Lydia. She's so
All
Lydia.
all the time. Yes. No, I that's why I had a section marked that was just exclamation points and hearts when it seemed like Darcy and Elizabeth would be able to, and Jane and Bingley would be able to get married, and then can they just
Right.
have their own two houses where they just mind their own business and take care of those couple of people and don't have to deal with all of this?
Well, they do
But
to some extent because they move, relatively far
they
away.
move further away.
Right.
Yeah. But the attachment is always there. I think that's what made it so interesting when we hear that Kitty does come to visit and is tempered by them, which is better.
No, I love that.
I do,
really
yeah.
love that because Kitty.
But I had that same sense where it's yes, you don't have to deal with any of this garbage. Just move.
Well, now I know why you brought that up. That's so interesting. All right. Well, if we're going to, I think we should go, I think it's appropriate to go straight from Lydia to talking about Charlotte.
Charlotte is so interesting.
Charlotte is so interesting.
Yeah. I like her.
I like her too. I've always liked Charlotte
think
very
Elizabeth
much.
is very harsh on Charlotte, is very hard on Charlotte. And Charlotte seems to know. We get that little bit from the narrator that the hardest part for Charlotte about marrying Mr. Collins was that she knew she was going to lose Elizabeth's esteem.
Yep.
And she did.
Right. Well, and there's also the irony of when Lizzie is when Wickham stops paying attention to Lizzie and starts paying attention to Miss King, I believe it is,
yes,
who has lots of money.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just all generosity for him. She's
yes,
like, oh, I wouldn't blame him for, trying to make a strategic marriage. And it's
of
like,
course,
dude, you just judged the shit out of your friend for doing the exact same thing.
Well, and that's one of the moments where the narrator comes in and really shows her hand again and is a little bit mocking of Elizabeth and says, on this matter, she could be much more clear-sighted. With Charlotte, she was perhaps much more clear-sighted. But it's showing that actually, no, on both counts, she's being very emotional and judgmental.
In addition to Charlotte being an interesting character and, interesting for the plot and all of that, I really appreciate in a book that's so much about marrying for love, this like down to earth actual, like, this is how most women married.
It is how most women do it, how most women have to.
Right. Because of lack of choices. And Charlotte's like super clear about that. Charlotte's just like, wait a minute, this is what I have to do. And again, this is going to go back to responsibility. So like, I obviously am a person who likes the idea of marrying for love. I'm not
right.
Let's just lay that out on the table. Marrying for love,
modern woman, yeah.
Good thing to do. I like that way of life. But I think that it's very interesting that Charlotte is making this choice and being very clear about to Lizzie right after Lizzie. I mean, again, I would not wish on anyone to marry Mr. Collins.
No,
but
it really is dreadful.
And as awful as he is, I did actually like tweet about this as well. I was like, in this time in our history of Me Too and of this whole conversation of incels and men who like believe that they have some, that don't take no for an answer and are harassers. And I don't mean not take no for an answer like with rape, but like don't take no for an answer and like keep this question of like, should men just stop? Well, they should. That men should stop persisting when a woman's like, I don't want to date you. That also is a no that you're supposed to take.
Right. Absolutely.
So reading the Mr. Collins proposal scene in that where he's like, oh, I know you women are you always say no before you're going to say yes because it suits you flatter yourself. I think he actually might have used the word vanity like that. And I was just like, fuck you, dude. But
he's the worst.
He is the worst. He is absolutely the worst. And my point when I was tweeting about it was that I actually, in this day and age, looking back, I would rather him have been played in the adaptations, and we'll talk about this in the adaptations, less for humor. I think. Oh. I feel like in reading it in the context of this moment in our history, as much more,
he's quite insidious,
much more menacing than how I used to read it.
Yes.
But that's an aside. We can talk about that when we talk about the adaptations. But as awful as her mother is, her mother has a point. Like Jane, we don't know what's going to happen with Jane and Bingley yet. And Lizzie saying yes would have actually saved all of them. Yeah.
Yes. No, that's a really good point.
And so
that's a really good point, actually.
Literally, the girls would all be in exactly the same position they're in right now. And that's, as awful as he is, was part of his consideration. Mm-hmm. He did actually have that consideration of like, this situation with the entail is crap for you all.
Yes.
I can do this thing. Like, this is one way I can kind of make it up to you.
All the Bennet girls are horribly spoiled. Darcy calls it when he says, like, you and Jane happen to also be great women, which is great, but like, I don't know how that happened. You're an anomaly.
Right.
You're a Bennet anomaly. This shouldn't have happened. You've been completely spoiled.
It was left up to chance. Again, this whole idea of living according to what suits you in the moment is just, I think the book has a very clear attitude about that.
Has a lot of things to say about that.
Yes.
It's just, it was too much a part of the culture that she was in for her not to.
Right. So again, this is like critically. Bingley is lovely, but he also, I don't think he's at all held up as an ideal. because he also does that. He's sweet. He's nice. He's really good at the stuff that makes us prejudiced towards a person, including us, the reader. Like, we're prejudiced towards him because he's sweet and he's nice and he talks to everyone and he's really generous and he's delighted all the time by everything. And these are all things that prejudice us towards a person. But that's
a really good point.
There's no substance there. Like, he himself said, like, if I got tired of something, I would just move on. You know? So it's like, you have no guarantee that his delightfulness will continue or benefit anyone for any amount of time. I mean, I hope he and Jane manage to continue liking each other. He seems pretty fickle by his own description.
That's a good point.
I feel much less confident in their future relationship than I do with Lizzie and Darcy. No, that's not true. I don't really mean that. I think they'll be very happy, and I think Mr. Bennett's assessment is true. Like, everyone's going to take advantage of them, and they're just going to be mild and sweet all the time and super boring. Don't understand. They're so boring.
I don't know. I would certainly like to go to a Netherfield ball.
Yeah, but not because you want to hang out with Bingley particularly and like have a conversation with him.
I don't know. I think I disagree with you on that.
Okay.
I find people who are just genuinely enthusiastic and delighted by everything very refreshing.
No, that's true.
If it's sincere.
That's true. Okay. I think I would enjoy a few conversations with him, but long term, I would much rather somebody who has a little bit more of substance. I mean, he himself says he's like,
I think that's fair.
I don't delve into anything. I don't really have any opinions.
No, I think, okay, this is the difference. The difference is a ball or a dinner party.
Right.
Like, I want to go to a dinner party with Darcy and Elizabeth for sure.
Yes.
But a ball, I want to go to Bingley's ball.
Right.
Like, that's just a more fun
party. I
want
to live near Darcy and Lizzie because chances are we'll like regularly, have really interesting conversations about books and interesting things. And like, Bingley, like, I'd like to go out on a
big
lark.
Christmas party.
Go on a lark with Bingley. Just like hop in a car and just go wherever.
Yes.
For a little while. Ideally, if there was alcohol involved, because otherwise I would get bored with him.
Yes. He would never get bored with you, though. That's the lovely thing. The next day he'd be tweeting,
"Who knows?
Had the most delightful time with Daphne Olive. She's so pleasant and wonderful."
Yeah, but then he would like forget.
What insight?
But then a week later he'd forget because he didn't even
That's
remember
true.
how
Daphne
long he hadn't seen Jane.
That's fair.
There's not a lot of there is what I'm trying to say.
No, you're perfectly right.
Okay, so we did talk about Charlotte. Yeah, my big point was about responsibility and about recognizing just, and okay, one more thing about Charlotte. Like, I love that when Lizzie goes there and she starts to see how Charlotte had shaped their day-to-day life in a way that was the most manageable for, I have all the respect in the world for her. She's just, again, wouldn't want her life. Absolutely not. But like, and she's not exciting like Lizzie.
No. Well, this is why it was an excellent choice for Charlotte. This was a good choice for her.
I mean, it's not.
This is we are led to believe by the narrator
in the circumstances she has,
and the best that Charlotte could do.
Right. It's the most practical choice. It made the most sense.
Yeah.
It's not ideal. I mean, I'm sure she would have loved to. I mean, although Charlotte, I think, said she's just like, she's just not.
She's not romantic in that way.
Right. She just.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she could do better than someone that she has to actually manipulate so that she doesn't actually have to spend much time with him.
Sure.
Like all the Garnier is just like
very happy to make that trade for the estate at Rosings.
Right. I mean, she's happy. Is she happy? Is Charlotte happy? I think Charlotte is relieved. I'm sure there's a reality where Charlotte, if she had found someone younger who was better suited to her,
happy
she would have been happier. Right. I don't.
Happy is a stretch, but I think that she is content with her decision.
Right. She's content with her decision because she didn't have a lot of options, and that's the point. Is that we had to recognize that Charlotte didn't have a lot of options.
Right.
She wasn't young. She wasn't wealthy. She lived in this rural place where not young and not wealthy was just not going to get her anywhere. So
it's absolutely right.
So she married into economic comfort for herself and her siblings. It was going to benefit
preservation.
Right.
The narrator called it.
Well, and it was going to benefit her siblings as well.
Yeah.
So
no, it was, and in that sense, it was
It was the smart
much
choice.
More generous than anything that Lizzie has done, certainly, for her family.
Exactly. I mean, again, by chance. Again, we keep saying this. It's like basically Lizzie.
As it happens.
As it happens,
said,
she
sure,
ended up
because,
marrying the richest dude in the story, and so that does benefit everyone. But again, we're just banking on a whole lot of happenstance for for any benefit Lizzie is giving her family.
There are interesting things I think that Austen says too about essential selves. Just that people in the exact same or very similar circumstances and places in society, that their innate character changes very much. Just the way that they act in the world. That there is a strong. She seems to put a very. She seems to put a lot of stock into the essential self of her characters, so that their circumstances are very much secondary. Nobody seems to be a product of their environment in the way that you might imagine.
She definitely does blame the parents, so there is that. Like, I think it is implied that had the Bennett
but all the
parents
sisters
been
are
better,
so different,
right?
Again, in their selves.
So maybe we could say that when the society isn't doing its job to give them structure, then your essential self will pop out. But that I think there is an argument for some of the traditions of the way children are raised actually benefiting them.
Sure.
I think there is an implication that had the Bennett sisters been raised with more structure and more that they actually would have all been raised up by that to a level that, again, Jane and Lizzie ended up at by chance because of their essential selves. But I think there is an argument that also one's environment does partly end up creating who they are.
Sure. I love how with the five sisters, I mean, Kitty and Lydia are basically the same person.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the five sisters and how they relate to each other.
It's hard to do, really, because at first it seems so strange because it seems like Kitty and Lydia almost move and act as one.
But they don't. It's really Lydia doing stuff and Kitty following
along.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then once Lydia moves on and moves past Kitty, Kitty gets a chance to kind of be her own person, which is a little bit more reserved and a little bit wiser than Lydia, which is nice. Mary fascinates me. I wish we got more of Mary. I think Mary and Mr. Collins would have been perfectly happy together.
I know.
They would have been quite happy together,
I think
actually.
that's always, I mean, I feel like that's everyone's reaction. It's like, dude, you just picked the wrong sister.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he wanted a pretty sister, and it's made very clear all the time that Mary's not as pretty as the rest of them.
Which is too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, a lot of Mary's personality is framed by the narrator as a reaction to her not being as pretty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Middle sister also, she is dead center in 5, so that's a rough.
It is.
I mean, she is just like the two younger ones have a connection with each other, the two older ones have a connection with each other, and Mary's just like,
yeah,
I got no one. She's got no one.
I know. That's why she's so accomplished. Yeah.
I know. I feel. Well, is she though? Is she so accomplished? She thinks she is.
No, from what I understand, she is accomplished but not talented.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Right. So her piano playing is... Right.
Like, she is the one who practices. She is the one who commits herself to it. She just lacks that natural grace and sparkle and
Jane
whatever
Austen,
it is that makes Elizabeth.
Jane Austen definitely believes in... I mean, I think it's referred to as taste in the books. Like that she super believes in natural talent.
Yes. No. And I think that's one of the other things that I'm trying to say about the individual and essential selves being so important to Jane Austen.
Yeah. No, there is definitely that.
Mm-hmm.
There is definitely that. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But yeah, I almost feel like, for me, I've always had the sense that, like, the 5 sisters are almost like a fractured self. Like, none of them, like, Lizzie's the most well painted for us. Like, she's the most fleshed out. She has a real personality. I think even Jane really is just like a type. And I feel like they're all a type. And I've always had the sense that they've been fractured because their house is one of disharmony. it was almost, I don't know. It's hard for me to put words to this. There's always this like vague sense I've had about the depiction of the sisters. Cause it is almost like each one gets their trait. Like they don't, even Lizzie doesn't really get to have all of the traits. I mean, she learns that. I mean, I think that's part of what happens when she meets Darcy and has someone who challenges her and challenges her in a way, you know, in a loving challenge, like challenges who she is in a way that helps her grow. But I almost feel like none of them got to be fully well-rounded because they just lived in a house that wouldn't allow for that. And so they almost are like 5 parts of one person. Instead of,
I think it's very difficult as a sister anyway, just in the same way it's with mothers and daughters, not to identify yourself in conflict with the other, like in opposition,
in
to
relation,
the others. Yeah,
yeah. But I feel like, I mean, almost the text is doing that because it is like each one. I mean, they're almost caricatures.
Yes,
even Jane.
So.
Even Jane is almost a caricature.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it
an
is
archetype, really.
Yeah, but also a caricature. Like, but yeah, well, kind of both. But yeah, it's just, and I feel like an archetype, it can be a fleshed out person who also fits a role in a larger sense of, you know, kind of humanity. And a caricature is someone who's never allowed to have that fully fleshed out person.
Yeah,
and to
and I definitely see and Mrs.
to be
Bennet as a caricature, but I don't think I see Jane that way.
I do. Yeah. For me, she really is. She's the caricature of the mild woman.
Right. Yeah.
And it is also comical. I mean, because we get to see it through Mr. Bennet's eyes, it does have a comical aspect to it, which he's not, again, I don't think he's wrong. Like his assessment of Jane and Bingley. Like he does see them as, he loves them, but he sees them as comical. And I don't think he's wrong. I mean, you're right. She does learn a little bit. She's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit critical of Caroline. But like mostly she's a bit comical to me. And I believe, I mean, I'm definitely seeing her through Lizzie's eyes. Like Lizzie mocks her lovingly. And as you know,
Lizzie mocks everyone lovingly. Right. But again, and her dad too, they're both very, that's where her judgmental tendencies come from. I feel
exactly.
Like, from her father.
Right.
And it's easily mistaken by Elizabeth and by her father for intelligence. And Elizabeth says that.
I have that quote too. I love that quote. Wait, I'm going to find that quote. I tweeted that one in relation to the internet and fandom and how people are really mistake being against something with being clever.
Yes.
Here it is. Okay. So Lizzie's talking to Jane and she says, "And yet I meant to be uncommonly clever in taking so decided a dislike to him without any reason. It is such a spur to one's genius, such an opening for wit, to have dislike of that kind."
Yep.
So she even mocks herself, which I like. I appreciate.
I mean, it takes her a while to get there. But yes.
It's so true. That's funny. Like it's almost like Lizzie becomes the narrator. In a way, because the narrator mocks everyone, including Lizzie, and Lizzie has to learn to mock herself.
Like the narrator is like the elevated version of Elizabeth, maybe future Elizabeth Bennet, like regaling us with this
that.
Tale,
that actually works for me.
That works very well for me, actually. Yes, because it is with that same sort of like, you're disappointing me, but I know I love you and you'll get better. That kind of self-love, really.
Wow. I like that very much, is the idea of the narrator as being more mature version of her.
Yeah.
I like that very much. That's fun.
Yeah, I think that plays.
Yep. All right. Well, on that note of now deciding who the narrator is in this story, our mysterious narrator. I like this.
We solved it.
Yes. No, this is my headcanon from now on about who the narrator is. We'll have to see in future books who the narrator is, but I think in this book it's more mature Lizzie. I like that very much.
I like that. That's lovely.
So yeah, on that note, we have to do 2 things. First, we have to talk about our favorite things. I think I already showed my hand here.
Yeah. Okay, then you go first.
Okay. Well, mine is the piano conversation, hands down. Favorite scene in a book.
Yeah. Wow.
I know I keep doing this where I like make these declarations, but it's true. That is my favorite scene. I love it so much. It's perfect. I mean, it is a perfect scene as far as I'm concerned.
Why does it speak to you so much? What is it, the delights
I
here, guess is what I'm
enjoy
asking.
witty banter. I feel like
Okay.
everything about their whole relationship is condensed down into that one conversation where they see each other and understand each other and give the criticism that in a much harsher way they're about to learn from each other. But in the piano scene, like it's almost like a preview of the letter and you know, the bad proposal and the letter and all that. It's a clever preview of that. So it's everything about from when they first met and the prejudice and the pride and the insults through the sharply understanding the faults of the other one and getting to the other side of it. The I'm not afraid of you for me is the other side of it. Like, I feel like the whole book in a way is condensed into this one conversation that isn't just concise and beautifully written, but really fun. It's just fun. The three of them talking while Lizzie's playing piano is just a delight to read. I get excited when I'm getting close to it. Like when we arrive at Rossing's, I'm already getting right. I get excited that the scene, and I've read this book so many times, and every single time I get excited when we're getting close to that scene, and then I will read it a few times before I move on.
Lovely.
So yeah, I have a strong favorite.
I'm going to go with The Visit to Pemberley. Is really lovely. That's when we get that kind of like quiet introspection on Elizabeth's part. We get to really meet and understand who Darcy really is when he is himself.
When he's at home.
Which is really lovely. And when he's home.
Yeah.
And of course, I love her aunt and uncle very much, and some of the things that they're doing with the portraits on the wall that kind of tell the story of this family and the way that things start to fall into place for Elizabeth.
Yes,
her mortification when she sees Darcy, their walk together with her aunt and uncle behind, and how she's just both wanting more of his company and can't wait to get away from his company. And she says all the time, like she's so torn. All of that is beautiful. And to see him being just unequivocally just such a gentleman,
right,
is lovely.
Wanting so much to demonstrate for her what he's learned from her. It's beautiful.
Yes, it is
so
lovely.
beautiful. Yeah. Yes, I'm already excited to watch the adaptation, and not because of the swimming, which is not in the book. Everyone gets very excited about Darcy jumping in that lake.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely the part where, and then his white muslin shirt clung to his firm. No,
that is not in the book.
Oh, well.
I mean, it's cute.
I get that.
It's cute and all in the. I'm like, people are just like turning, just like, I will never listen to her again, right and left when I'm saying this. It's cute in the adaptation. But it's not what's important to me. I love their discomfort. Their discomfort is just so beautifully done. So beautifully done. Can't wait to watch it again. Okay, so speaking of adaptations, in 2 weeks we will be covering the Pride and Prejudice adaptations, both the 1995 BBC adaptation and the 2005 film. And that is going to be a lively conversation, I'm sure, because it's already a lively conversation in my head all the time. And and then we're going to take a tiny break from Jane Austen. We will be coming back for Emma soon-ish. But we did have a few interesting topics pop up that might become podcasts. So we will then just keep you posted on when we'll be doing Emma, and we might in 2 weeks be announcing a different podcast or two that we'll be doing in the interim.
And keep an eye out for towards the end of the month, we're going to be doing our commentary of Becoming Jane. We will do that live, so you can join us. You can pour your glass of wine, you can make your popcorn, you can sit down and watch this movie and chat with us live in probably a YouTube is where we'll do it.
I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do it, but
YouTube or Crowdcast.
But the important information about that is you can only do that if you are our patron on Patreon. Yes. This is a special invitation for our patrons. The website is, hit it, Liz.
Patreon.com/Common Room Radio.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. My best audio, Vanna White. Yes.
You can become our patron on Patreon, and there is all sorts of bonus material there from this podcast and our other podcasts as well.
Correct.
And we have committed to this idea of doing
doing commentary tracks where we watch stuff and talk about it in real time with each other, which is fun for others. Also fun for us because
also a blast
we've
for us, which is nice.
not gotten to do that many times in our lives,
No.
actually, because we live in different cities.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, become our patron, and we're gonna have lots of fun together. And
Yes.
And in 2 weeks we will be having a discussion that we'll post as a normal podcast about Pride and Prejudice adaptations.
So with that, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. From Common Room Radio, I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive. Can I Just Say podcast is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and our other shows, visit commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can make a big difference. Visit patreon.com/commonroomradio to pledge support and access bonus features that are just for patrons. And join the conversation by using the hashtag #CanIJustSay and follow us on Twitter @JustSayPodcast. We request that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and you can always email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com. Thanks for listening.